she had come in because she had a really severe migraine. And so I had her, while she was on the table, bring up the fear. And then when I said, when you're starting to feel the fear, you let me know. And then so she says, okay, I'm feeling it. And I said, now put all your focus on the fear. So then I had her do the next step, which is even a little bit more uncomfortable. And I said, now pull the fear into the center of your mind. And this is an exercise of like almost a mental inhalation. You're seeing the fear and then you're drawing it into the center. And it actually intensifies that experience. And her eyes got a little bit twitchy, and then all of a sudden the migraine was gone.
What if the best chapter of your life hasn't even begun yet? What lies within you is the power to live brighter, bolder, and truer than ever before. So welcome to Vivatude, where caregiving, connections, and career come into balance, and where your vitality, vision, and voice shines through. Because the revolution isn't out there, it's already within you. Welcome to Vivatude.
Welcome back to Vivatude. I'm Lauren Archer, your host, and we are talking with Laurie Heusinger about the power of our emotions to transform, to heal, to release long-standing patterns that maybe we couldn't address in the past. Her book, The Toggle Effect, and the technique that she has pioneered has helped so many people move through experiences that they thought they could never heal from. So, Laurie, I'd love for you to share with us some specific examples of people who maybe, doctors couldn't help, or they thought that they just were stuck with whatever this lifelong condition was, and you were able to help them through this technique that you developed.
Well, thank you. And I would love to. When I started to realize the changes that were happening in my own health, and I was running a clinic, so I had lots of clients, and I would explain this to them, and they became very willing to give it a try. Um, One of my favorite stories is a woman who had migraines pretty much every week, most of her adult life. She was a nurse. Sometimes those migraines would get so bad the doctors would be checking her to see if she was having a stroke. Nothing seemed to be alleviating her migraines. We did body work things at our clinic, and so she would come in and we would do some body work to help her through those really severe migraines. But at the point where I made this discovery, I was beginning to introduce it to the clients. And I told her, I said, um, what is the emotion that comes up right before the pain hits? And she thought about it and she said, it's fear. And I said, let's do this technique on the fear and see what happens. And she had come in because she had a really severe migraine. And so I had her, while she was on the table, bring up the fear. And then when I said, when you're starting to feel the fear, you let me know. And then so she says, okay, I'm feeling it. And I said, now put all your focus on the fear. As she poked, and I said, you might see color, you might see shape. The fear is made of stuff, and your internal awareness can zero right in on it. And that's what we want.
Can I interrupt you real quick? Because
Yes,
that is what most people don't want to do, right?
that's
I mean,
exactly why. Yes,
yes. Okay, go ahead.
it is. We have been avoiding the thing that is the medicine in a sense.
Yes.
So then I had her do the next step, which is even a little bit more uncomfortable. And I said, now pull the fear into the center of your mind. And this is an exercise of like almost a mental inhalation. You're seeing the fear and then you're drawing it into the center. And it actually intensifies that experience. And I'm talking it through and I'm going, pull it in deeper, keep pulling it in, pull it in deeper. And even as a therapist from the outside, you can feel the tension release when this flip happens. And that flip took place. She went, oh my God, what happened? What happened? And her eyes got a little bit twitchy. And then all of a sudden the migraine was gone. Well, I had been seeing her every week for a couple of years. And she said, and she stopped coming in. And I thought, all right, maybe this was a little bit too much for her. And my business partner said, I said, well, give her a call and find out. She goes, no, I haven't had a migraine since. It was amazing. And so my
Wow.
business partner says, stop teaching them that thing. And I said, I can't have an answer and not teach it to them. I said, I am
Absolutely.
not, So anyway, that was one of those scenarios where we saw that direct connection between the emotional stress, the function of the mind to convert the stress, and the physical body, and the tensions held there, and we call that illness. So yeah, we've
That's
used it over and
phenomenal.
over.
It's a process that you guide people through. And in your book, you give examples of how people can do this on their own. So I want to let people know that this is available. And it's counterintuitive because it's something that we don't want to feel, right? It's those emotions that are uncomfortable. And yet, just like you shared in our, previous segment, that the medicine, the cure is in that. So, can you give us some more examples of how this has helped other people so that our listeners can get a sense of, maybe this can work for me?
Yeah, well, the interesting part too is that when that emotion converts, it converts into a positive emotional state.
Ah,
So it's this interesting, you also feel better emotionally and your mind functions better. And so there we had a police officer that had been through a traumatic event. His partner got shot and killed. They were both at a traffic stop, and his partner died in his arms. And he had to go through the protocol of sort of a decompression with the psychologists that were hired by the police department before he could go back to work. But it didn't really work for him. And so we were at a big conference at a booth, and he said, well, will this kind of help me? And I had it on a tape, a videotape, or I mean, an audio tape. And I said, take this back and it'll talk you through the process, just like I was just saying it now, Lauren. And I said, it'll
mhm.
talk you through the process. And I said, and if it doesn't work, bring it back. And so he came back the next day and he said, I'm amazed. He said, I didn't know I felt guilty. Also, that survivor's guilt. And he said, once I moved those, he said, I haven't been able to talk about it like this since it happened 2 years ago. And he was just profoundly changed. At that point, we were able to teach it to a whole fire department. The word was sort of spreading. Um, and so we had some really great results with him with that post-traumatic stress disorder. I've had people with type 2 diabetes, and we've been able to identify certain emotional stressors when their blood sugar won't come down, even with the insulin, that you can talk them through the process of bringing up some of the emotional stress, focus on it, and pull it into the center of the mind. And we've watched blood sugar drop on their little monitors from about 2 to 300 all the way down to 100 within about 7 or 8 minutes. I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling. So it helps them manage their diabetes, just understanding the stress component.
Hmm. We do know a lot about the mind-body connection, and there's a lot out there. But what strikes me about your approach is that it is very specific, it's very doable, and it is focused specifically on an emotional pattern. So can you tell us more, and how else are people using it? How else would you like people to put this in context with their life?
Well, that's a couple of questions, but yeah, at the time when I was developing this work, a good friend and colleague of mine was in acupuncture school, and she started handing me all of the information they were taught about the mind emotional connection to the 5 elements that they study in acupuncture. Each of those elements has relates to certain organ systems and body tissue and certain cognitive function and certain emotional states. We were able to reorganize that entire uh, body of information into what we were seeing with the toggle effect. which gave us a way to be able to zero right in. If we search it on that Chinese medicine chart, we're like, it's related to these negative emotions. And if you pull in those negative emotions, you get these positive emotions and you get that positive cognitive function. And it gave us the ability to target exactly. For instance, we had a lady who was not going into labor. She was 9 months pregnant. The doctors wanted to induce. She said, I don't know if I really don't want to induce, but I haven't had any Braxton Hicks, no pre-contractions all month. And I have this pain in my hand. Well, when you go to the Chinese medicine chart, the pain in the hand was the hormonal system.
Mm.
Okay. Now, the pain in the hand in the Chinese system is also our relationship to um, the people closest to us. And when we're angry at people we love, that emotional system affects the hormonal system. And so I asked her the question. I said, are you angry at somebody you love? And she said, yeah. And I said, you don't have to tell me about it. And I said, I said, how long have you been angry? And she said, about a month. And I said, how long have you had lost the Braxton Hicks contractions? She goes, about a month. And I said, how long have you had pain in that finger? She said, about a month. And I said, okay. I said, I want you to imagine that you need to hug that person because that brings up the repulsion that we hold inside. And once that feeling came up, I talked her through the process, pull it in, pull it in. It shifted. And then within about 15 minutes, her contractions started. She
Okay.
left the treatment session and her husband contacted me 13 hours later. They had a beautiful baby born at the hospital. So, but it
Wow.
was interesting within minutes, you started to see that the body responding to that release.
Wow. Yeah. And I'm sure you're very skilled at identifying what that is. And your process, though, is at least gives people a starting point so that they can take emotions that they may be working with and shifting that. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So, oh, go ahead.
Well, the other thing too is understanding that when one emotion shifts, within a few seconds, a second emotion comes up all by itself. And then you
Okay.
need to shift that, and they come in threes, and you want to shift all three. And that stabilizes the whole system, and the mind goes completely relaxed, and the mood improves. So it's important to note that there will generally be an upsurgence of emotions after you move the first one, and they generally come in threes.
Okay. Well, we're going to take another quick break. And when we come back, I'm going to invite Laurie to share with us some visuals and just a way to conceptualize, to imagine what she's talking about. It's a very profound, somewhat esoteric process. And yet the way Laurie explains it, I think you're going to be able to start applying this in your own life. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
And thanks for listening to Vivatude. 4 hosts, 1 each week. We help you revivitude your next chapter because purpose, passion, and prosperity isn't out there. They're already within you. Brighter, bolder, truer. Vivatude.